What's up, friends? Before we hop into the show, did you know that one man every hour, every day is diagnosed with testicular cancer? At Manscaped, they save balls. This means not only designating the right tools for the job, but raising awareness for the ball-busting disease, which is the most common form of cancer among men ages 15 to 35. Yes, you heard that right. 15 years old to 35 years old. As part of Manscaped's brand mission, their partnership with the Testicular Cancer Society aims to educate and entertain while spreading a very important message about early detection and self-screening to protect yourself against men's health issues and cancer risk. First and foremost, go get those balls checked. Next, grab a Lawnmower 3.0, use that code DNVR to save 20% plus free shipping and help the proceeds go towards an amazing cause. Buy the Performance Package and crop mops today at Manscaped to contribute to the We Save Balls initiative. So make sure to head to Manscaped, use that code DNVR to save 20% off that purchase and free shipping. And every purchase made in March goes towards contributions to the Testicular Cancer Society. All right, Mace, let's hop into the show.
Number one for the one and only DNVR. Two goes out to Zach, Mace, RK, and the bar. Three for Mr. B in that old trophy case. Number four, we're still waiting for. Well, bring on the chase. Out on the field, a mile high, Broncos win is our desire. Couple with a breakfast crew and a friend, bleed orange and blue to the bitter end. Come and join us at the DNVR. We are DNVR.
Welcome into the DNVR Broncos podcast on this Monday edition. Mace, we're only 1 week out from the start of the legal tampering period. But before we hop into the show, got to tell you about our presenting sponsor, MSU Denver Online. MSU Denver Online puts a dynamic education at your fingertips without forcing you to decide between earning a degree and living your life. MSU Denver is the Colorado institution providing rigorous and affordable online programs taught by professors who bring the real world into the classroom. So whether you want to take one class or go and graduate, make sure to check out MSU Denver Online. My boy, Mace, what's going on? And a special shout out today on International Women's Day to all the amazing women that listen to this show, also to the ones that help put this together, especially Allie, Michaela, and Lindsay at DNVR, and of course, all the amazing women in all of our lives.
Maybe instead of saying my boys, you should have opened with my girls. It's International Women's Day in honor of all those who really make the gears of society and beyond mesh properly. I mean, that's obviously we've had some changes for the better in how we and how we have equality between the sexes. We still have a ways to go. I was reading last night something with my daughter about how there's still a pay gap for the same job between males and females in this country. So we are not there yet, but we're certainly getting closer every day. And yes, a shout out to all the women in sports and beyond who bring so much to this industry and to what we do.
Yeah, and it's awesome that the past 2-3 ring circuses, Mace, we've been able to have two of those amazing women in this industry with Lindsey Jones and Nikki Javala, and hopefully we'll continue to have more on Mace. And Mace, speaking of Friday's 3-ring circus show, right after the show, some news came down. A couple of news items. The first one, Von Miller not going to be charged. Everyone kind of expected that up to this point, and we expected that the Broncos were kind of working on those lines with that assumption in mind. So very good news for Von. Now the Broncos can just really focus on football when it comes to making the decision on him, which they have to do within the next week. And then the other news, the Broncos officially placed the franchise tag on Justin Simmons. Mace, we knew that Justin wasn't going anywhere. And so we knew that if they couldn't get a long-term deal done, that this was going to happen. But interesting that they did it on Friday when they could have waited until tomorrow to do it.
Yeah, and I think the only thing you can read from making it official on Friday rather than letting it play out until the deadline tomorrow is that while there is progress going on between the sides, clearly, that they're not yet at the dot all the I's, cross all the T's juncture when it comes to his contract. I mean, you only do it on the on the 5th rather than the 9th because you know you're not getting it done by the 9th. I don't think this means that people should panic. I think every indication that we've gathered is positive regarding where things stand with Justin Simmons and the Broncos. And I expect that by July we will be talking about a contract and hopefully sooner. I mean, kind of the recent example of a second franchise tag resulting in a long-term contract was DeMarcus Lawrence in Dallas, and that took, I believe, 30 days from when he was tagged until when they got a deal done. So hopefully we're looking at that sort of time frame just to make sure this is out of the way. And then the other thing, Zach, is if you get a contract done here in the next 4 to 8 weeks, then if you do manage to have some in-person OTAs, whatever form those might take on whenever they might happen, you can have Justin Simmons out there. It would be good to have that resolved by that time. Again, we don't know if OTAs in person are going to happen, but with vaccine distribution ramping up, maybe there's some reason to believe that teams can gather at some point in mid to late June for a few weeks of on-field sessions.
Yeah, and Mace, I know that right when the franchise tag was applied, a lot of people freaked out saying, oh no, is this the last year that Justin Simmons will be a Denver Bronco? Since the franchise tag is a one-term deal, and since you can't franchise tag 3 straight years. And no, this does not mean that Justin Simmons is walking out the door. They have until July 15th to come to a long-term deal with Justin. And like you said, Mace, everything we've heard, it points to that deal getting done. And so don't worry about that. This just makes sure that Justin Simmons does not hit the open market. It buys more time, and everything is going in the right direction. And everything that George Paton has said makes it very clear that his intention is not to have Justin Simmons on the roster in 2021. It is to have Justin Simmons here for the long term. And in fact, Mace, right when they put the franchise tag on Justin, George Paton put out a statement saying, designating Justin with the franchise tag is a procedural move that allows us to continue working on a long-term deal. We're completely focused on making sure Justin remains a big part of the Denver Broncos for many years to come. So really, don't worry, is what George Paton's saying. Justin Simmons is going to be here for the long term. And also, Mace, like we talked about a little bit last week, that franchise tag number is $13.75 million. In order to reset the market, he would have to just be paid $14.76 million. So just a tiny bit over $1 million in order to reset the market. So the sides really, just from that starting point, aren't that far away.
Yeah. Now, the only danger here is, we've been talking about Justin Simmons and his contract and saying, okay, does he go north of $14 million? If he gets to $14 million a year, he's in the top 5. If he gets to $14.2 million, he's in the top 3. If he gets north of $14.75 million, and this is all an average per year contract value, he's number 1 because that's the Budda Baker number right now that Arizona gave him last year. But what if the market changes? I mean, I don't expect you'll be talking about anybody resetting the market, especially because you had Marcus May get tagged by the Jets. The Jets announced their intention to tag him several days ago. But what if somebody gets a little bit frisky and gives Keanu Neal, more than he's worth. And what if happen? And that is the risk that you run here. I feel like it's a little bit of a micro version of what we've talked about a lot in terms of kicking the can down the road and somehow thinking, oh, the price tag might get cheaper. No, the price tag might get more expensive. Anthony Harris of Minnesota is another one who's kind of borderline now. He's 29 years old. He made $11.441 million last year. Most people think he's going to take maybe a little bit less, but what if his deal somehow gives him a little bit more? What if there's one frisky team? Now, that being said, if there's a year to bet on nobody being frisky and breaking the bank for safeties who maybe aren't worth top 5 money, it's this year when, again, we go by every indication of that we know of progress with Justin Simmons. Every indication we have right now in terms of how the market's going to look is that a lot of teams, they may not be closing their wallets completely, but they're going to be, to put it kindly, more frugal than most years, understandably, because their revenue has taken a serious hit in the last 12 months. And so we may be in an environment where we may not have to worry about that happening just because of the climate of this year's offseason. And so maybe it's not going to be an issue that the Broncos are kicking this down the road. Maybe they don't have to worry about the price tag going up or the top 5 average going up.
Yeah, exactly. And Jared comes in with that question. He says, what I don't understand is what will change between now and then? Why? Or do the deal now? Why not? And Mason, you kind of just touched on it. There's no real reason not to do the deal now, unless you have any trepidations about resetting the market for Justin Simmons, or you're unsure if you want him long-term. Well, that's not true. We know the Broncos have no questions about wanting him long-term. So it would just be about resetting the market, not wanting to do that for him. And Mace, it just doesn't make sense. There was a conversation last year when you were paying him $11 million on the franchise tag and not wanting to pay him, $14.75 to reset the market. There's a conversation there. And not this year, though. When you're just talking about $1 million, get the deal done. And Mace, you said those other names could reset the market potentially. Another name that could happen is re-signing Jamal Adams. The Seattle Seahawks can do that, and they will do that at some point. That's a guy who I don't think would just reset it at 14.76. I think he's a guy that could reset it at 15.5, and then you're having to pay Justin 15.75. So, Jared, I totally agree with you, man. At this point where the Broncos are, there's no reason to kick the can down the road.
I can think of one, though.
Oh.
One reason.
Oh.
Sign and trade, and he's involved in a deal with Deshaun Watson. And then you're telling Houston, or tag and trade, and then you're telling Houston, okay, you work out the long-term deal.
Right.
Tag and trade. And that's and that may be one thing that, as long as you view it as a possibility, at least for a couple of months, it might govern your thinking a little bit. Now, that being said, one of the things that is getting out there in the last few days is that Houston appears set to dig in with Deshaun Watson, and that there isn't going to be resolution, not only anytime soon being in the next couple of weeks, but not before the draft, not even before the offseason. They are prepared to take this standoff into the regular season. Hey, good luck with all that, Houston. Yeah. But if that is something that, if that is more kind of bellicose rhetoric rather than something that happens in the actual realm, and there is a possibility of making a trade for Deshaun Watson, then having Justin Simmons on a tag and trade could basically set up him being involved in that sort of thing. And that may be, at least maybe deep in the Broncos' minds, it may be something that they're considering in all this as they work this thing out. But that being said, it certainly wouldn't be a financial thing or a cap thing even, because Deshaun Watson's contract is pretty reasonable for this year, and it wouldn't take much finagling to squeeze that $10 million in if you did manage to trade for him, which, again, I don't expect the Broncos to be able to do in the next few months, but it may be something that is out there in sort of a deep down the list consideration in terms of how this is progressing.
Well, look at that. We made it 13 minutes before mentioning Deshaun Watson's. I'm pretty impressed because Mace, we had a whole weekend just building up of this. We made it over 10 minutes. Very impressive, as Jared points out. But now, Mace, my question would be, well, why could he be involved in a tag and trade, Justin? But if you get a long-term deal, he wouldn't be involved. Would that be because of the dead cap that the Broncos would have to eat in a trade like that?
Potentially, and that's one thing to consider because, of course, the signing bonus is on the team. And the other thing is you would then give the Texans control over whether they wanted to get a long-term deal or not. And it would also give Justin some flexibility as well. I mean, if he were included in such a trade, if he were just on the tag rather than on a long-term contract, you give Justin a window to potentially get out after a year and go test the market himself. So a tag and trade, if that were to come to pass, again, I don't think this is likely, but that would be friendlier to Justin Simmons and would be doing right by him more than signing him to a 4-year deal and then shipping him off to the Houston Texans, where not only is he stuck in Houston, but you've got the prorated portion of the signing bonus that you're going to be cranking out year after year. And that would actually have an immediate impact on your cap as well.
Yeah, it certainly would. And Mason, so that was the initial thing, was people saying, "Oh no, they're not going to be able to sign Justin Simmons to a long-term deal," which is just not true. The other thing that I kind of got from this that could give people some hope on a long-term deal happening sooner rather than later is Mace, during the John Elway era, he would take things all the way up to the deadlines, and there was nothing wrong with that. That's just how John Elway did it. So he would wait until noon tomorrow, right before the deadline, to apply the franchise tag, to tag Justin Simmons. He would do it 5 minutes before. And then the same was true about signing guys to long-term deals who were on the franchise tag. Everyone except for Justin Simmons got a long-term deal done when they were on the tag. And it always came down to that July 15th deadline, right within 24 hours. But what did George Paton do, Mace? He did not do that. He did it multiple days before he applied the franchise tag, didn't wait for that deadline. So that gives me hope that he's not going to wait until July 15th, July 14th to do it. And that's why I think that DeMarcus Lawrence 30-day timeline you talked about could be something that we're talking about with Justin.
Yeah, and I think back to how things dragged out. There's still an image in my mind of Von Miller and John Elway in line to go to the White House, like standing outside the White House perimeter, going through the security checks. And two of them, they were several spots in front of me in the traveling party in the line, and they were having a very animated conversation, which I believe was their first in-person conversation that they've had since Super Bowl Sunday of that year. And how that went. The one that stands out to me in terms of leaving things to the last minute, not just in terms of the tag, but in terms of getting a contract done, it was the Demaryius Thomas deal. And if you recall, you had Dez Bryant also in play that year as well with Dallas. And it was like, okay, who's going to blink first and give the deal that sets the market? And both of them went down to about as late as possible. And another example of doing things at the last minute, and this is where it bit the Broncos in the tail, was Elvis Dumervil with the fax and trying to get the restructure done in time, but the fax machine didn't work. The communications broke down, and the next thing you know, they have to cut Elvis Dumervil. Now, nobody is relying on faxes anymore, thank goodness. It's e-documents and so forth, and we're in a little more enlightened era in that regard. But that, you know what, the thing is, that moment, the fax incident with Dumervil, you would think that would have been the thing that compelled the Broncos to not work on things at the last minute. Maybe be just a little bit ahead. No. They can put things down to the wire.
Yep, they certainly did. And Hayduke comes in with a great point. He says, or are the Broncos just pausing negotiations with Justin Simmons while they work on Vaughn, Shelby, etc.? And Mace, this kind of brings us to the next point of our conversation. Is another name to throw in there, Hayduke, is Kareem Jackson. Because, Mace, we talked to George Paton last week, and he wants everyone back. He wants all the Broncos back. He wants to run it back. But one of the things he didn't say, pretty much outside of Justin Simmons, was at a certain price, is what he didn't say. It was a very good PR move from George Paton. But I think you have to read between the lines that he's not just going to bring everyone back on their current contract. Vaughn, he's not just going to pay Shelby whatever he wants in free agency, although he said he was a priority. And Kareem Jackson was one of the most interesting ones. He said, yeah, we of course want Kareem back. He did say that Justin and Kareem, you take those deals separately when you look at them, but he didn't say, yeah, we're picking up his option no matter what.
Yeah, and kind of one thing that you're thinking about here is you're thinking about the cost of having two safeties. The Broncos had the highest paid safety duo in the NFL last year. If you bring Kareem back on his current contract, they will almost certainly have the highest paid safety duo in the NFL this year. The only other team, Zach, that had two safeties that were on contracts that average $10 million or more per year was the Minnesota Vikings. And now The Vikings are likely moving on from that because Anthony Harris's contract is expiring. And if they don't bring Anthony Harris back, then they will probably move out of the group of teams that have two safeties on 8-figure per year contracts. And that would leave the Broncos as the only one. So I think what you have here is a little bit of kind of a cost benefit thing going on at the position. Saying, do we really want to have for this year more than $25 million of our cap going to the safety position? How important is it? And I think in a vacuum, you'd say, yeah, that's too much for the safety position. But when you look at the Broncos situation and you have a cornerback core that is in flux, you've got right now you have Bryce Callahan, Michael Ojemudia, and Essang Bassi coming off of an ACL as your top three guys. And so two of those players have significant injury concerns. You can add a free agent, certainly, and you can add a high draft pick. But are you still looking at a situation where you're a little bit skeptical about the composition of that cornerback room? Certainly, if you bring in a Patrick Surtain or a Caleb Farley or a J.C. Horn, you're plugging that guy in to start from day one. But how good will they be? I mean, rookies are talented, but there's a variance. I mean, there may be an adjustment period, and you do have Bassi and Callahan with injury concerns. So if you have a situation where maybe you're going to overpay the safeties, it might be this one because you need them to sort of clean up the mess a little bit more than most safety tandems would. So the Broncos might be in a situation where they need to have a couple of really good safeties. If the question then becomes, okay, can we get any relief for Kareem Jackson? What happens if we give him a little bit of a bonus? Can we get a bonus that ties him to us for another couple of years? Is that a chance that we want to take? Or do we just want to get the $10 million of relief right now and roll the dice with whatever we can find on the market? We've kind of had this discussion with other positions. Can the Broncos find 75% of Kareem Jackson for 30% of the cost? That's why we discussed Will Parks last week. And this is something that I'm sure they're having discussions on right now in regards to Kareem Jackson. I'm sure they're talking with him, they're exchanging figures, but they're also thinking in their mind, okay, if we can get him to a certain figure here that stretches it out, or we walk away and we get the cheaper safety on a 1-year deal. The only thing is, Zach, if you do make that change, you probably put yourself in a position where you have to have safety, a potential starting safety, come off the board to you at some point in the first 4 rounds. You have to you're going to be on the 2-year plan with that safety, but then it becomes a draft need.
Yeah, if you move on from Kareem Jackson, safety is absolutely a draft need because you just have no depth behind. Because remember, Will Parks is a free agent this year. So if they want him back, they're going to have to give him some money in order to do that. Now, it's going to be significantly less than Kareem Jackson. But Mace, it wouldn't be a shock if they move on from Kareem Jackson if cornerback is their first pick and safety is their second pick. Or, safety maybe being that 3rd round pick instead of the second. But there'd be a big investment there. And you make the great point of could you find 75% of Kareem Jackson at 25% of the price? And just with how the safety position is, Mace, I think you can. And Will Parks is pretty much the perfect guy for that. We said, 1 year, $3 million for Will Parks if you're going to do a 1-year deal. Well, Kareem Jackson making $12.8 this year. So that's 25% of the price. And Will Parks certainly isn't Kareem Jackson, but I think he's pretty much 75% of him. So boom, right there. Yeah. That's your natural replacement. But the way you laid out the argument, Mace, is perfect because you're going to need a big strength with that safety group. So what I'm doing for 1 year is I'm keeping it the highest paid safety group. Again, I'm keeping Kareem Jackson. I'm picking up the option. I'm personally not extending him right now because I'm okay with doing this for 1 year. Now, where I would really step back and take a pause is if this was making Kareem Jackson a top 5 paid safety along with Justin Simmons for 3 or 4 years down the line. I personally want to avoid that. But for 1 more year, I want that safety group to be very strong.
That makes a lot of sense, and I see where you're going with that. The only thing is, what if there's a possibility to take that $10 million if you let go of Kareem Jackson and turn it in? I mean, I'll throw a name out. What if you can turn it into Patrick Peterson?
Right.
I mean, or say probably about 75% of Patrick Peterson. You're probably having to go a little bit more to get him under contract. Richard Sherman is going to be on the market. These are both guys who flourish in zone, and yeah, they're long in the tooth. Yeah, the name maybe is a little bit bigger than the play right now, but can they come into a fairly young cornerback room and provide an upgrade? Peterson in particular, I think, as the Cardinals incorporated more man concepts the last couple of years, he wasn't who he was. I think if you plug him into a Vic Fangio scheme, that Peterson shines. But that's a big money deal. That would be a signature. That would be a signature deal. That would be a signature contract. So, and again, how much of what he did the last couple of years is scheme related? How much of what he did the last couple of years is age related? If you believe it's scheme, and I think it's more scheme than the level of play, then it's something that you think about, because I see Higher Learnings with a comment saying that Patrick Peterson's been getting burnt. And again, that's why you talk about the scheme fit. I mean, how many times with a cornerback do we say scheme fit, scheme fit, scheme fit? It was the rationale for being willing to part ways with Chris Harris Jr. last year, because the scheme no longer fit what he did best, and you were stepping away and moving on. The other thing that comes into play is when you're talking about the secondary as a whole. If you're going to be open to trade downs, and we've seen a bunch of mock drafts talking about the Broncos trading down, then you have to make sure that you've got a starting 22 that you're comfortable with, that gives you the flexibility to say yes when a team says, hey, we're going to offer you a first-round pick and a third next year and a third-round pick this year to move down 6 slots or whatever, or maybe move down a couple of times. I mean, Zach, I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos move down once and then move down again and really go into pick accumulation mode. And if that happens, let's say they're picking 24th or 25th when their name finally gets called in the draft. You really don't want to be locked into a position at that point. Then you're at the moment in the draft where you do want to say best player on our board. And that best player on the board may not be an obvious need. What if the best player, what if you trade down twice and the best player on your board is Najee Harris? And if you haven't done the things at this point on the calendar, in terms of bringing back your own guys, bringing in some value free agents, if you haven't done the things in March to make sure that you've got a starting 22 that you trust, you don't have the flexibility to say, okay, we're going to pick the best player on our board who happens to be a running back. And it's possible that the Broncos could make a couple of trade downs and be staring at Najee Harris. And if that's the guy, you'd like to have the flexibility, and you'd like to be set up roster-wise to be able to have that kind of dice roll where the risk-reward ratio on a running back would be right.
Yep, you're 100% right, and I love that scenario, Mason. That's a scenario that we could be
looking
at.
Well, you love your Alabama guys, Zach. That's another reason why I tossed that in. But if you're talking about a first-round running back, I mean, to me, like last year, I talked about, Jonathan Taylor maybe at the end of the first round if you made a few moves, and Najee Harris kind of is, I think, that same kind of back. And what the two of them have in common is their skill set is suited for today's NFL. Both of them really good at catching the football. And of course, Jonathan Taylor, once he got his sea legs under him with the Colts, second half of the season, how many running backs were better than Jonathan Taylor league-wide? 1, 2, 3 backs. He was dominant down the stretch. And I think if you had a couple of trade downs and you were able to make sure that your roster was kind of set, Najee Harris would make sense then. Maybe he wouldn't make sense earlier, but he might make sense then.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. And Mace, going back to the safety, that's the one thing that makes me say, okay, I'm fine with moving on from Kareem Jackson this year, is if you take that $10 million in cap savings and you spend it on cornerback specifically, or of course quarterback, but cornerback specifically. But here's the thing, you got to make sure that $10 million is a hit, because with Kareem Jackson, you've got a great player this year. That's a hit right there with that $10 million. You have to make sure that you don't miss on that cornerback, because then you're moving on from a $10 million very, very good player in Kareem Jackson. And if that doesn't hit, then that's going to hurt your team right now and in the future. So you just, and the vets make sense, Mace. Yeah. The Patrick Peterson, if you believe he can rebound, Richard Sherman, he can play right now. Hey, those are kind of short-term guys, or at least Richard Sherman is, but that you're going to hit on those guys. If you go with more of an unproven guy, then that's going to be more of a risk. If you hit, then it was the right move to move on from Kareem.
Yeah, and I think you maybe get creative at cornerback, and maybe you're saying it's two guys. Maybe it's one guy that you're secure in, and then another guy who is more of an upside dented card guy. And that's where we get into Chidobe Awuzie, who was benched by Dallas. You get into Kevin King, for example, who was seen getting burned in the NFC Championship game by Scotty Miller on that deep pass up the left sideline that the Bucs had right before halftime, but has shown some flashes and could be a good scheme fit. Desmond King, who was with the Chargers and played an all-pro level a couple of years back, and then was with the Titans late this past year after being traded. Those are some guys, but you wouldn't want any of those three as your primary solution in terms of Awuzie and the two Kings. But maybe you're saying, okay, we've got to go shopping for a couple of corners. And that second corner probably is somebody who's really on a prove it kind of 1 year, $4 million type of deal.
Right.
And then you've got your big money that you've spent on somebody who you would expect to be your cornerback one, and then you're fortified down low. And then, you know what, if things work out and there isn't a good trade offer and you stand pat at number 9, you pick Surtain or Farley, and you're set at corner. Now you're not worried as much. You can always use one of those guys, and certainly one of those guys would play his way into the lineup in a pretty prominent way. And the other thing, I mean, if you've got one of those guys, the other thing is, if you're doling out 1 year contracts to corners, remember Bryce Callahan's in the final year of his deal as well. So it's not like cornerback suddenly doesn't become a position that you would be happy to get in the first round if you end up standing pat at 9. But I think we all agree the Broncos not only would be wise to be in the trade down market, but there's a decent chance they will be in the trade down market in terms of acquiring future assets. So if you make sure cornerback is taken care of in the next couple of weeks, then you have the flexibility to trade down, accumulate some picks. And perhaps, for example, if one of the picks you're accumulating is an extra second rounder, if you've let go of Kareem Jackson and you have a starting duo of Simmons and Will Parks for this year, maybe you're able to say, okay, that's our plan. But Richie Grant is available in round 2, and he's someone who's a real ball hawk, and maybe you think about him.
Yep. It definitely put you in a position of strength doing something like that. And it's crazy how many dominoes are going to fall in the next 7 to 9 days, because, Mace, 1 week from now, the official tampering period opens in the NFL, which will really, really be interesting, because there has been no combine for agents and teams to talk. That's when they will begin doing that. And then next Wednesday, a week from this Wednesday, is when free agency officially starts, when guys can officially be signed. And of course, leading up to that, the Broncos have to make contract options decisions on Kareem Jackson and on Von Miller.
Yeah, and of course, it's funny that the legal tampering period starts next week. Historically, the illegal tampering period goes on at the combine. No in-person combine this year, but there was that report that the Broncos did reach out to Ryan Fitzpatrick, which of course would be illegal tampering. But you also have John Clayton writing that Fitzpatrick is really strongly considering retirement at this point.
Interesting. He just had enough heartbreak throughout his career, being benched, playing well, being benched.
Well, the thing is, and the thing that I've been thinking about with Fitzpatrick is that, you know, he's made $71 million. He's got a large family, not Phillip Rivers level, but certainly it's not easy to uproot everybody, and that he may not want to do another move,
right,
for $5 million and a chance to compete with Drew Lock. That maybe it's just okay. It's time. You know, I've run my race. I'm 38 years old. And I just go ahead and move on. And so that's why it wouldn't be surprising if he just decided to hang him up right now, and or maybe even when all was said and done, decide, okay, you know, I'm content being a backup. I'll just stay in Miami for another year.
Right, man. What I could see him doing is, you know, retiring now and then getting that itch mid-season and coming in and playing for a team, taking a team to the playoffs or something like that. That would be the ultimate Fitz move.
Well, Fitz in the playoffs, starting a playoff game. That's the one thing that we haven't seen from him. I mean, as he's bounced around, a journeyman quarterback, the one thing that he didn't manage to do is start a playoff game. I mean, even Brian Hoyer started a playoff game. And actually, Hoyer was the guy who came in 2015 after Fitz started for Houston in 2014, and Hoyer got the Texans to the playoffs. Of course, the other thing with Fitz is that the biggest game of his career, Week 17, Jets at Bills, 2015 season, Jets win. They're in the playoffs. As John Fox once said, he picked a bad day to have a bad day.
Yep. Yes, he certainly did. Oh man. Well, we'll see what happens with him, because of course that's a domino that'll fall for the Broncos. If he decides to retire, he won't be on their list of veteran hedge quarterbacks that they could bring in. And Mace, before we get out of here, I was curious what DraftKings Sportsbook had on their odds for Najee Harris being picked. He's the second. He has the second best odds to be the first running back drafted, behind Travis Etienne at -121. You have Najee Harris at +100. So heck, Broncos trade back. Let's say they're sitting at 26 or something. It's very possible that the second running back on the board at Najee Harris could be available. So you can find those odds over at DraftKings Sportsbook. We thank them for presenting this live. And man, if you like Najee Harris to the Broncos, maybe +100 could happen there. But Mace, this has been a blast. We're going to hop over to the podcast side of this to answer all of the listener questions. Check us out anywhere that you find podcasts over at DNVR Broncos podcast to get the second half of this podcast. And thank you so much for tuning in live. Please hit us with a like, a subscribe, and sign up for those alerts on YouTube as well. We really appreciate everyone checking in on YouTube, and we'll get to the comment section in just a second.